Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. Country music star Jason Aldean has become the antithesis of Budweiser. While companies like Disney and others have been struggling as they reel from public ridicule, well, Aldean is going in the other direction. Country Music Television, or CMT, they canceled him. The media establishment is painting with controversy. It looks like all the powers that be are against him. But despite all this, his song has soared to the top of the charts and the public is rallying behind him. It's actually an interesting case study on whether the establishment still has this sway they believe they have over public opinion, because every marker of influence now suggests it does not. Let's go into this. On May 19th, Aldean published a new song called Try That in a Small Town. He wrote on Twitter, "To me, this song summarizes the way a lot of people feel about the world right now. It seems like there are bad things happening on a daily basis, and that feels unfamiliar to a lot of us." This song sheds some light on that. Now, the music video shows scenes reminiscent of the Antifa and BLM riots that swept across the country. It addresses the violence that was carried out in big cities and the acts of lawlessness still being carried out and being normalized, and says, try that in a small town. Now, critics are doing everything they can to paint the song as racist and as advocating for violence. Now, I should note, there's nothing in this song technically about race. And the parts about violence are more about saying people in small towns do not tolerate violence or lawlessness, and they will defend themselves and others if they see it. Now, as for race, well, the song does appear to criticize the violence, riots, and the attacks against the country and against law enforcement that groups carried out by, again, BLM and Antifa. And it gives references to acts of violence that are often painted as being in support of so-called racial justice. In other words, it's being called violent for advocating for rule of law. And it's being called racist mostly for seeming to oppose violence from groups like BLM. That's the narrative, basically. Now, it also goes into other crimes, such as when it says sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, criticizing this, by the way. Now, that's likely a reference to the knockout game that was making headlines back in 2013, when teenagers around the country, mostly in inner cities, were sucker punching random strangers who were often white people, at least on the terms of the charges. The challenge of their game was to try to knock people out in a single punch. In fact, that year alone, this so-called game killed 4 people. When it says carjack an old lady at a red light, again criticizing it, it's likely in reference to the many carjackings that are happening all around the country now. Many of these have likewise led to the killing of the victims. In fact, in a case last year, 4 teenagers held a 73-year-old woman at gunpoint to steal her SUV. She was allegedly caught in her seatbelt. She was dragged by the vehicle. Her arm was ripped from her body and she was killed. Now, many of these crimes are generally viewed as being symptoms of lawlessness, not about race politics, and also of a loose-on-crime policy now spreading across the United States, and the perpetrators are often seen getting light sentences even in cases where the victims are killed. Now, we often blame this on district attorneys supported by billionaire George Soros, who advocated for lighter criminal sentences, even said publicly he was going to do it in an op-ed, and again, that's based on race. And it's probably because of this that they're calling it racist. The message in the song references these acts of violence and says, look, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Round here, we take care of our own. Now, notably for conservatives in the United States, that's a fairly common sentiment. When people are watching Antifa attacking conservatives, when they saw the left burning down their communities, it was often pretty common to hear people say, I'd like to see them try that around here. I personally heard a lot of people say that. And the perception is that Democrat cities no longer have rule of law. Things deemed acceptable in Democrat cities are not deemed acceptable by most of America. Criticism of this song just looks like another case of the ivory tower of liberalism, criticizing what they call, quote-unquote, flyover country. It's the elitist disdain and disconnect from the values and the culture that's still held by most of this country. But the powers that be feel otherwise. Controversy really took hold after CMT, again, country music television, pulled the song from its rotation. As Billboard reported on July 17th, the music video for this was being featured regularly. But then the network removed it and noted that CMT declined to comment on why they chose to do that. The report went on to frame the general narrative, though, that other media would end up repeating. It says that in the video, Aldean performing in front of a courthouse with an American flag hanging from the entrance. Yet it also says the performance is interspersed with footage of a flag burning, protesters screaming and attacking police in various scenarios, and robbing a convenience store. Now look, for anybody who actually watched the video, context is really important here. The song and video were obviously criticizing the burning of the American flag. It was obviously criticizing the attacks on police, and it was obviously criticizing those robberies. But if you just read what Billboard wrote, you could easily think it was the opposite. But also, despite being canceled and despite the attacks that are still going on right now, this song is soaring in popularity. It's become the focal point as well of a national debate. When it was first canceled, the song had 346,000 views on YouTube. Just this morning, it had 8.8 million views. As of right now, again, since this morning, it's already jumped to 9.7 million. It's currently the #1 song on iTunes and the top song in trending music. But there's also a media machine behind all this. The main narrative they're spreading right now is that the song is being framed as representing race narratives, gun violence. They're even saying it represents lynchings. In fact, Jason Aldean, he was on the stage in Las Vegas in 2017 when a mass shooting took place after an alleged gunman injured 500 people and killed 58 by opening fire on a country music festival. Now look, I personally don't understand how being a target in a mass shooting makes you a bad guy. But that's the narrative, and they're sticking to it. The Washington Post even tried painting itself as an authority on all this by explaining this controversy. Now, after repeating the narratives on BLM, it then criticizes the music video for being filmed in downtown Columbia. It claims that just by being filmed in downtown Columbia, that the entire site, the entire area, is a, quote, site of historical acts of violence against black people. MSNBC also parroted some of this as well. Watch.
Music video shows Aldean interspiced with news clips of protests out of context. It promotes vigilantism and was filmed in front of the Maury County Courthouse in Columbia, Tennessee, the site of the 1946 Columbia Race Massacre and the 1927 mob lynching of an 18-year-old black teenager. I guess he doesn't know that because many conservatives are canceling Black History too.
Well, you know, not many people know about crimes that happened 100 years ago, but just saying. And of course, they are talking about the lynching of an 18-year-old who was accused of raping a 16-year-old white woman. But they're also missing that many historical courthouses that old had many executions take place at them. I'd actually say you'd be hard set to find a single historical courthouse that did not have executions. And yes, going that far back, many of them also had lynchings. The media manufactures controversy, and it manufactures labels like this. One outlet declares that it's controversial, another claims reports on that claim, and then interviews quote-unquote experts, and then other media use the media narrative to label the topic as controversial. It's created within this system, and then they use it. Oftentimes these labels are just cooked up. They're manufactured within the media machine, and they snowball from this shared reporting. The news outlets latch onto each other's narratives that make it sound like it's a big public controversy, but it's often not. For example, imagine you're at a workplace. Two co-workers hate your guts. One of them goes around spreading rumors about you, and then the other one then uses the rumors their friend is spreading about you and says, "You're controversial," every time your name comes up in a meeting. You think it's valid? Now, at the same time as people debate the controversy online, many noted the horrific and violent lyrics that are often deemed acceptable in many other popular songs. Many noted rap music, for example, which doesn't seem to garner much controversy, despite lyrics that very often advocate for rape, robbery, and murder. What it looks like is ironically happening is the media establishment is trying to lynch Jason Aldean. They're trying to assassinate his character. They're trying to destroy his career. And it looks like they're doing this not because they seem to have an issue with, violence in song lyrics. They don't have an issue anywhere else. But instead because they disagree with his political views. It looks like they want to make him an example. They're trying to paint him with controversy, to shame him, degrade him, and by doing so send a message to the rest of the country music scene, which they hold an equal hatred against. This could happen to them as well if they don't toe the political line. That's the message they're trying to send. In fact, the Washington Post in particular has been at this for some time. In 2021, they framed Jason Aldean as having right-wing views and then painted this as a problem in the, quote, DNA of country music. The media establishment has actually done similar hit pieces on him specifically over the years for things like opposing vaccine lockdowns. He was attacked last year after his wife threw clothes from fashion firm Balenciaga in the trash after the company was criticized for sexualizing children in its advertisements because it had kids holding teddy bears with BDSM gear. Now, more recently, he was criticized by the Washington Post for failing to, quote, keep his politics private. He was accused of the thought crime of showing his toddlers wearing anti-Joe Biden t-shirts as they framed it. But look, politics aside and narratives aside, what we're watching is a reading of the public heartbeat. We're seeing a difference in impact and a sign of what the public actually cares about. How is it that the corporate media, the entertainment industry, most of the so-called voices of influence, they call themselves at least, they can stand behind woke companies and the companies can still face a financial crisis if the customers abandon them? But at the same time, if those institutions of influence can try to paint a public figure with ridicule and public support sends that person to the top of the charts, what does that mean? This is bigger than just Aldean and bigger than just a country music song. What this shows is that the powers of the establishment are fading. The screeching of the voices of influence do not actually have the influence they claim. They're trying to destroy them and they're failing at it. The media establishment does not represent public opinion. Businesses have little control over what people actually want. And it's because it's becoming a lot more clear that the noise of the media machine is just that. It's noise. It does not represent what people actually want or what they believe. That's all for tonight. Thank you for joining us. And as always, stay informed and stay free.